Less than 3 miles from Tunbridge Wells, the Museum of Costume at Eridge Castle is open from mid-April to mid-October. This is the first of 6 films that were devised there about the clothes of men and women. Films in which you will see genuine costumes with their accessories, worn just as they might have looked when they were new. I've made a selection of the fashions of the past 250 years. To go back further than that, I should have had to fake parts of the costume, and the whole point about these is that they're the real thing. As for the interesting models who wear them, I wonder how many of those you're going to recognize. Now, how do these strange and sometimes startling fashions come and go? There are a good many reasons why not everything we read about fashion is literal truth. A great many people live by writing about it, and a great many more have some kind of vested interest in it. So there's always a certain amount of propaganda in the air. Then there are the caricaturists, whose jokes are often repeated seriously, and the preachers and pamphleteers, who from time immemorial have worked themselves into rages about extravagance in dress. The quickness of the pen deceives the eye, and sometimes people come to believe the jests, the satires, the exaggerations. To believe, for example, that new modes are imposed on us, whether we like it or not, by a group of fashion dictators plotting behind the scenes. Conspirators, hatching the secrets that the press yearns to know in advance. There's a widespread illusion, too, that the mode in dress is subject to sudden and utterly unpredictable change. That a frock like this, the polonaise and petticoat of the late 18th century, can be transformed in the course of a mere year or two to something like that, the slender muslin gown of the Napoleonic years. Or from a skirt that reaches to the instep, like this mode of 1914, to one that ends abruptly at the knee, like this model of 1928. It's also commonly accepted that styles are conjured out of the blue by famous personalities. For instance, the crinoline. There's a legend that that was brought in by some queen or celebrity to conceal approaching motherhood. It would be hard to think up anything less suitable for the purpose than a garment which has always called for a very well-defined waistline. Throughout all the annals of fashion, we find important modes come into existence by slow stages and never vanish overnight. That characteristic Victorian style, the crinoline, took approximately 50 years to evolve. The empire dress is the scantiest, and the crinoline is the most voluminous of all the fashions of the 19th century. Follow the stages that led from one to the other. Our empire dress is about 1806. And here's one made some 10 years later. You'll notice that the skirt has been growing wider by degrees and no longer clings to the limbs. Another 10 years has gone by. It's 1825, and the dress has grown quite decidedly wider and now requires at least one substantial petticoat to support it. Yet another 10 years passes and still more petticoats are needed. Fashion is carrying the vogue for wide skirts to its extreme limit, a stage when you can't make them any wider because they wouldn't be bearable or wearable. 10 years more, the 1840s, and the skirt has horsehair petticoats to give it extra volume. Horsehair was known as crinoline. Sometimes 2 or 3 hoops of whalebone are put into the petticoats, and still fashion insists on fuller skirts. So in 1856, an enterprising French manufacturer produces a ready-made hooped contrivance to make the dress look immensely large without the burden of all those underskirts. It caused a sensation, yet something of the sort could have been prophesied from the time when it became clear that the demure, unobtrusive Victorian woman was determined to take up as much room as possible. The crinoline doesn't contain any horsehair, as its name implies, and the hoops are in fact steel, but the magazine writers seized upon an already popular word. This fine specimen is of the 1860s. Take a last look at these 6 stages, showing how that remarkable garment evolved decade by decade. No single individual can bring about such a total change of the mode, though naturally dressmakers and their most enterprising clients can help to establish it. The acceptance of any really extreme style needs a preparation of at least a dozen seasons. Here's another striking departure which needed an even longer time. The dress of the mid-18th century, at the greatest width it attained for normal purposes. For, of course, we mustn't be misled by the handful of eccentrics in each epoch who carry things to the furthest limits. What is an extreme style? Well, it's a candidly irrational style. Cascades of hair covered with flour meal falling over a man's shoulders, we could safely agree that's an extreme of fashion. It took well over 40 years to reach such exuberance as this about 1710. A sleeve as big as this, probably made in 1831, was about 14 years evolving.